During a police patrol, a sniffer dog senses something strange and starts barking uncontrollably at a seemingly innocent 70-year-old man. When the officer asks what the old man has in his hands, he starts to sweat and shake nervously. What happens next is shocking. Before we continue, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss any exciting stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The soft morning mist still hung over Pleasant Valley when Mrs. Clara Martinez adjusted her yellow shawl and walked to her mailbox. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of flowers from her garden, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread from the Oliveira's bakery, 2 houses down. But that morning something was different. The usual silence of the street, normally comforting, seemed charged with an unusual tension. Her experienced eyes, after 75 years of observing the subtle changes in her beloved town, immediately noticed the colorful posters tacked to the telephone poles. From a distance, she could make out the smiling face of a girl. She approached with cautious steps, adjusting the reading glasses she always wore on a chain around her neck. "Sofia Garcia," she read in a low voice, her heart clenching as she recognized the little ballerina she used to see practicing her steps through the window of the dance studio across the street. The same girl who, just 3 weeks ago, had waved happily at her as she walked to school with her pink unicorn backpack. Clara felt her legs weaken and reached for support on the pole. It couldn't be possible that something like this could happen in Pleasant Valley. The town had always been a tranquil place, where everyone knew each other by name, where doors were rarely locked at night, and where children could still play on the sidewalks under the watchful eyes of their neighbors. As she tried to process the information, she noticed movement at the Garcia's house. Carolina, Sofia's mother, was hurriedly leaving, carrying a stack of new posters. Her eyes, normally bright and cheerful, were marked by deep, dark circles. Clara remembered the countless mornings she'd seen her serving coffee with a warm smile in her small cafe downtown. "Carolina, dear," Clara called, her voice trembling slightly. The younger woman stopped, turning slowly. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize her neighbor, her eyes unfocused with exhaustion and worry. Clara felt her heart break at the sight of the mother's despair. Without a second thought, she approached and wrapped Carolina in a tight embrace. The posters fell to the ground, scattering like autumn leaves at their feet. As she helped Carolina collect the posters, Clara began to recall every detail of the last few weeks. The seemingly unimportant conversations at the farmer's market, the whispered comments in church, the subtle changes in the routine of certain residents. Like a patchwork quilt, small fragments of information were beginning to form a pattern in her mind. Most importantly, she remembered the strange behavior of her old friend Alfredo, the former librarian, who seemed more agitated than usual during their daily meetings in the park. There was something in his eyes, a restlessness that she couldn't quite decipher. The morning breeze blew harder, making the posters flutter in their hands like flags of hope. On the horizon, the sun began to disperse the mist, revealing the familiar outlines of Pleasant Valley. Clara knew, with the certainty that only a lifetime of experience can bring, that the secrets of the town couldn't remain hidden for much longer. Not when there were so many watchful eyes and hearts willing to help. Sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, Mrs. Clara watched the movement on the street while her skillful hands automatically knitted. Knitting always helped her think clearly, and now, more than ever, she needed to organize her thoughts. The conversation with Carolina that morning had awakened something in her memory, fragments of events that seemed to connect like the stitches of her handiwork. Miguel, Sofia's father, had just passed by for the 3rd time that day, distributing posters in his tireless search. Clara noticed how his shoulders slumped, the weight of his worry visible in every movement. The couple's small cafe, normally a cheerful and welcoming gathering place downtown, had remained closed for 3 weeks, the curtains always drawn like a silent symbol of Sophia's absence. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of paws against the asphalt. Rex, the Belgian shepherd from the K9 unit, was passing on his daily patrol with Sergeant Oliveira. Clara smiled as she remembered how, just a month ago, Sophia would run to pet the dog every time she saw him pass by. The animal always showed a special patience with the girl, as if he knew she was different from the other children. "The children," Clara murmured to herself, letting the knitting fall on her lap. Something about children was bothering her memory. She stood up with determination and walked to her desk, where she kept decades of carefully organized diaries. Her daily records were more than a hobby. They were a living testimony to the history of Pleasant Valley. With fingers trembling from arthritis, but still agile, she leafed through the yellowed pages until she found an entry from 30 years ago. There it was, the story of little Marina, Alfredo's daughter. At the time, Clara was a teacher at the local elementary school and vividly remembered the impact the girl's disappearance had on the community. "How didn't I see it before?" she whispered, feeling a chill run down her spine. The similarities were unsettling. Marina was also 8 years old, also took ballet, and also disappeared on the way to school on an autumn morning. The case was never solved, and Alfredo was never the same after that. Clara picked up her old phone, one of those with large keys that her grandchildren insisted she replace with a more modern one, and dialed Sergeant Oliveira's number. While she waited, she looked at a framed photograph on her wall. Her 1993 class, with Marina smiling in the first row, wearing her inseparable pink ballet socks. "Sergeant, this is Mrs. Clara Martinez. We need to talk about something important," she said, her voice firm despite her age. "It's about Sophia, and about something that happened a long time ago in our town." On the other end of the line, the officer listened intently as Clara shared her suspicions. With each word, a new piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. The sergeant made several notes, occasionally interrupting with insightful questions that demonstrated his growing interest in the retired teacher's theory. Clara agreed, feeling a mixture of apprehension and hope. As she prepared to leave, her eyes once again landed on the unfinished knitting on her armchair, a small pink sweater she was making for Sophia, planning to give it to her at her next ballet recital. Now, more than ever, she was determined to make sure the girl could wear it. Before leaving, Clara did something she hadn't done in years. She opened her dresser drawer and took out an old school crossing guard badge, which she used when she was still teaching. It was a reminder of her commitment to the protection of the children of Pleasant Valley, a silent oath she had made decades ago and which now seemed more relevant than ever. The afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon when Clara closed her door, her yellow shawl once again over her shoulders. On the sidewalk, she paused for a moment to observe a blue butterfly that briefly landed in her garden, the same kind that Sophia loved to chase during school recess. It was as if nature itself was sending signals, guiding her towards the truth that had long remained hidden in the shadows of Pleasant Valley. Pleasant Valley's municipal park was particularly quiet that afternoon. The golden autumn leaves danced gently in the wind, covering the stone paths like a natural carpet. Mrs. Clara walked slowly, leaning on her carved walking stick, a gift from her grandchildren last Christmas. Her attentive eyes scanned the area, searching for the bench where Alfredo usually sat every day. As she expected, there he was, hunched over his newspaper as always. But there was something different about his posture today, a visible tension in his shoulders, a subtle tremor in his hands as he turned the pages. Clara knew those signs well. After 50 years of teaching, she had learned to read people as well as the books she loved so much. "Clara, of course, you caught me off guard," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was just thinking about stopping by your place later. Before Alfredo could answer, the characteristic sound of Rex's paws on the gravel announced Sergeant Oliveira's arrival. The dog walked in a disciplined manner alongside his handler, but Clara noticed how his ears moved constantly, alert to every movement around him. Clara observed how Alfredo almost imperceptibly flinched at the officer's approach. His hands gripped the newspaper with enough force to crumple the pages. "Actually, Sergeant, your arrival couldn't be more timely. We were about to talk about the past, weren't we, Alfredo?" The silence that followed was as heavy as the storm clouds that were beginning to form on the horizon. Rex, sitting obediently at the sergeant's feet, kept his eyes fixed on Alfredo, his head slightly tilted as if trying to decipher an enigma. The words hovered in the air like leaves suspended by the wind. Alfredo closed his eyes, and when he reopened them, they were tear-filled. "You've always been very observant, Clara, always able to see through people." Sergeant Oliveira remained silent, but Clara noticed how he discreetly moved closer, his professional posture softened by the compassion in his gaze. Rex, in turn, moved a few steps forward, his muzzle gently touching Alfredo's knee in an almost consoling gesture. A stronger gust of wind swept through the park, making the leaves dance around them. Clara held her breath, feeling that they were on the verge of a revelation that could change everything. The sun, now partially obscured by clouds, cast elongated shadows on the group, as if nature itself was creating a backdrop for the truths that were about to come to light. Alfredo took a deep breath, his restless fingers playing with the crumpled pages of the newspaper. The wind carried the aroma of the freshly planted chrysanthemums in the nearby flower bed, mixed with the characteristic smell of wet earth that precedes the rain. Clara kept her hand on his, offering the kind of comfort that only decades of friendship can provide. "That morning," he continued, his trembling voice gradually gaining strength, "I was in my usual spot, as I am every day since I retired from the library. I saw Sophia pass by, skipping as she always did, stopping to look at the flowers along the way. She waved at me, you know, always so polite, that girl." Sergeant Oliveira took a small notepad from his pocket, making discreet notes, while Rex remained alertly seated, his intelligent eyes fixed on Alfredo. Clara noticed how the dog seemed to react to every change in the old man's voice. "But there was something different that day," Alfredo continued, his gaze lost in memories. "I saw a car I had never noticed before, parked near the corner of the library. A man was inside, pretending to read a newspaper. These may seem like insignificant details to many, but when you spend decades watching the same street, the same people, the same habits, you learn to notice what's out of place." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Like the car that was parked near the school the day Marina disappeared," she whispered, the old memories returning with chilling clarity. Sergeant Oliveira leaned forward slightly, his professional expression masking the intensity of his interest. "What kind of pattern, Mr. Alfredo?" Clara squeezed Alfredo's hand harder, feeling his tremor. "Why didn't you go to the police, my friend?" A distant rumble of thunder echoed, as if underlining the gravity of the revelations. Rex perked up his ears, more alert than ever. "But this time, I have proof," Alfredo continued, his voice gaining a tone of determination. Slowly, he pulled a manila envelope from the inside pocket of his coat. "Photographs, notes, dates, times, everything I've observed in recent weeks, and most importantly," he hesitated, looking nervously around before lowering his voice, "I found out where they're taking the children." Sergeant Oliveira carefully took the envelope as if handling something precious and fragile. Clara watched as his eyebrows rose as he quickly examined the contents. "It's true," Alfredo interrupted, a surprising firmness in his voice. "And this time, I will not allow another family to go through what I went through. I will not let Sophia become just another painful memory, like Marina. Sergeant, she said, her voice calm but determined, I think it's time to pay a visit to the old clinic on the outskirts of town, the one that everyone pretends doesn't exist. The rain fell gently over Pleasant Valley as Mrs. Clara returned home that night. Her joints ached more than usual, probably from the damp weather, but her mind was more alert than ever. Sitting in her favorite armchair, with a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, she reflected on the day's events as she watched the raindrops slide down the window. The phone rang, breaking the comforting silence of her living room. It was Carolina Garcia, her voice trembling with anxiety. Mrs. Clara? Sergeant Oliveira just left here. He told us about your conversation with Mr. Alfredo in the park. Is it true? Do you really think there might be a connection? Clara closed her eyes for a moment, carefully choosing her words. Dear, in all my years as a teacher, I've learned that there are no coincidences when it comes to the well-being of our children. Every detail, no matter how small it seems, tells a story. As she talked to Carolina, Clara opened her old school photo album. There was the class of 1993, with Marina smiling timidly in the first row. Next to the photo, there was a yellowed newspaper clipping about her disappearance. At the time, the investigations had led nowhere, and gradually the town had moved on, as always happens. But this time, it will be different, Clara murmured after hanging up the phone. She stood up with determination and walked to her desk, where she began to organize decades of newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes she had saved over the years. Like a patient archaeologist, she was discovering patterns that had once seemed invisible. The doorbell rang, surprising her. Through the peephole, she saw the familiar face of Beatrice, Sophia's ballet teacher. The young woman was soaked from the rain, her eyes red from crying. Clara led the young teacher to the kitchen, serving her a cup of the tea that was still warm. Beatrice took a crumpled envelope from her bag, her hands trembling slightly. The photographs told a disturbing story. Every few years, a student would mysteriously disappear. The families always ended up moving out of town soon after, taking their stories of pain with them. The pattern was so subtle that no one had ever connected the dots. And there's more, Beatrice continued, her voice low like a whisper. Weeks before each disappearance, there were always generous donations to the studio. New equipment, scholarships, all coming from the same source, the Mendes Foundation for the Arts. The phone rang again. It was Sergeant Oliveira, his voice filled with urgency. Mrs. Clara, I need you and Miss Beatrice to come to the police station immediately. Rex found something during our night patrol near the old clinic, something that could change everything. Beatrice, dear, she said, picking up her umbrella, I think it's time we gave a voice to all those girls who couldn't tell their stories. And let's start by helping Sophia get back home. Pleasant Valley's police station was a modest two-story building, with exposed brick walls and old windows that creaked in the wind. On that rainy night, its lit lights projected elongated shadows on the wet asphalt. Mrs. Clara and Beatrice arrived to find Sergeant Oliveira at the entrance, Rex sitting alertly by his side. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said, leading them inside. The normally quiet environment of the police station was different, with an air of urgency hanging in the air. Several officers moved quickly, talking in low, serious tones. Margaret? Clara couldn't hide her surprise. What are you doing here? During our patrol tonight, the sergeant began, Rex led us to the back of the old clinic. There we found this. He placed a small music box on the table, delicately decorated with ballerinas in relief. Carolina confirmed that it belongs to Sophia. The former secretary took a deep breath, nervously smoothing her floral dress. When I saw the news about Sophia, something inside me broke. I spent all these years convincing myself that I was doing the right thing by remaining silent, protecting the Mendez family's reputation. But now, she opened her bag and took out a small, red-covered diary. For 30 years, I recorded everything, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Every suspicious conversation, every strange document I had to file, every night visit to the clinic. Dr. Mendez Sr. trusted me completely. Perhaps that's why he never realized that I was documenting everything. Fear, she replied simply, and shame, but mainly they convinced me that they were doing something good. They said they were helping the children have a better life in places where they would have more opportunities. Her hands trembled as she handed the diary to the sergeant. But now I know it was all a lie. Beatrice, who had been examining the music box, suddenly exclaimed, "There's something engraved underneath," she said, turning the base of the box. There, scratched into the metal, was an address. Rex, who had been quiet until then, suddenly raised his head and let out a low bark. Everyone in the room turned to the window, where a solitary figure had just passed quickly under the light of the lamppost. Sergeant Oliveira was already in motion, grabbing his radio and giving quick orders. "We need to act now," he said, his voice firm, "before it's too late." The rain had turned into a fine drizzle when the small convoy arrived at the industrial warehouse. The place was surrounded by a high concrete wall, partially covered by weathered ivy. Police cars formed a discreet perimeter around the building, their lights off so as not to attract attention. Mrs. Clara watched everything from the back seat of Sergeant Oliveira's patrol car next to Beatrice. Against all safety recommendations, she had insisted on coming. "Sophia will need familiar faces," she had argued, with that determination that her former students knew so well. Rex was restless in the front seat, his ears moving constantly. The sergeant had explained that the sniffer dog was picking up various recent human odors, a promising sign that the place was not abandoned as it appeared. Beatrice clutched Sophia's music box between her hands. The object, with its ballerina reliefs, seemed to shine faintly under the light of the distant lampposts. "She must be so scared," the young teacher whispered. Sergeant Oliveira gathered his team for a final briefing. Clara watched from the window as the officers checked their equipment and received instructions. The plan was simple, a silent and coordinated approach, ensuring that no one could leave the premises. "Mrs. Clara," Sergeant called, returning to the patrol car, "you were right about the patterns. We just received confirmation. All the girls who disappeared over the years had something in common besides ballet. All had received scholarships from the Mendez Foundation weeks before they vanished. And they were all extraordinarily talented," Beatrice completed, a new understanding dawning in her gaze. "The foundation always chose the most promising students for the scholarships. Sophia, she was special. She had a natural gift that you only see once in a lifetime." Everything happened very fast after that. The police cars simultaneously turned on their lights, blocking all possible exits. The black car braked sharply, skidding on the wet asphalt. From the driver's seat emerged the figure of Dr. Robert Mendez, his normally controlled face contorted into a mask of panic. But that wasn't what caught Clara's attention. It was the sound, faint, almost inaudible above the noise of the police activity, of a familiar melody coming from inside the warehouse, the same melody from Sophia's music box. Rex didn't wait for commands. With a powerful impulse, the dog jumped out of the patrol car and ran towards the warehouse, following a trail that only he could detect. Sergeant Oliveira and his team immediately followed, leaving other officers to deal with Dr. Mendez. Clara held Beatrice's hand tightly as they watched the scene unfold. Years of secrets, of silenced pain, of interrupted lives. Everything was about to come to light. The drizzle continued to fall, now softer, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The interior of the warehouse proved to be surprisingly different from what its abandoned facade suggested. Where one would expect to find dust and abandonment, there was an organized and clean space, with several dividers creating small rooms. Clara and Beatrice, now authorized to enter under police escort, watched in astonishment as Rex led the way, his nose glued to the floor. The melody of the music box became stronger as they advanced. In the air, there hung a peculiar aroma of baby powder mixed with the characteristic smell of new wood. The same smell that Clara remembered smelling in the dance studio during the year-end performances. "This way," Sergeant Oliveira signaled, following Rex to a door at the end of the hallway. The dog stopped in front of it, sitting and staring intently at his handler, the signal he had been trained to give when he found who he was looking for. When the door was opened, what they found made Clara bring her hands to her lips, containing a sob. The room had been transformed into a small rehearsal room, with mirrors on the walls and ballet bars fixed precisely at the right height for children. In the center, sitting on a small bench, was Sophia, still wearing her school uniform, focused on trying to fix her worn ballet slipper. Around her, 3 other girls, all appearing to be the same age, were practicing different dance positions. One of them was holding the original music box, from which came the melody that had guided them. All seemed physically well, although their eyes carried a tiredness that no child should know. "My little ballerina," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her wrinkled face as she embraced the girl. Beatrice joined the embrace, her voice choked with emotion. "They said we were going to a special dance school," explained Sophia, still in Clara's arms, "that our parents knew that it was a great opportunity. But I knew something was wrong. Mom always says that real opportunities don't need secrets." Rex approached gently, receiving a smile from Sophia, who reached out to stroke his head. "I knew you would come looking for us," she said. "Every night, before bed, I danced a little sequence that teacher Beatrice taught me. I told myself that it was a call for help that the wind would carry to you." Clara watched as the other girls began to approach timidly, drawn by the comforting presence of Rex and the kindness in Beatrice's eyes. The ballet teacher was already communicating with them through the language they all understood. Small gestures and dance positions that transcended fear and uncertainty. As the children were led outside, Clara noticed something that made her heart ache. On a picture on the wall, there were photographs of other girls, dozens of them, from different eras, all in ballet poses. Among them, she immediately recognized the smiling face of Marina, Alfredo's daughter, wearing the same pink ballet slippers that her mother had bought for her first performance. "Sergeant," Clara called, pointing to the picture, "I think we finally have all the answers Alfredo has been looking for all these years." The news of the rescue quickly spread through Pleasant Valley. The municipal hospital, normally quiet at that time of night, turned into a center of emotional reunions. In the main hall, Clara watched the scene with her heart overflowing with emotion. Carolina and Miguel embraced Sophia as if they would never let her go, while other families experienced similar moments with their recovered daughters. "She hasn't stopped talking about you," Carolina told Clara, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "She said she knew her favorite teacher would help find her." The girl was right. It was the small details, carefully observed and connected, that had led to their discovery. Clara thought of Alfredo, of how his attention to seemingly insignificant details had finally made the difference. "Some scars need music to heal," commented Mrs. Margaret, who had arrived to give her official statement. The former secretary seemed to have aged and rejuvenated at the same time. The weight of the secret had been replaced by the lightness of accepted remorse and revealed truth. Sergeant Oliveira appeared carrying a cardboard box that made Clara hold her breath. "We found the files," he said, placing the box on a nearby table. "All of them, every disappearance, every transfer, every forged document, and this. He took from the box an old framed photograph. In it, a group of girls posed in front of a theater somewhere far away. Among them was Marina, a few years older than the last time she was seen in Pleasant Valley, but with the same gentle smile that Clara remembered. As if invoked by her words, the old man appeared at the hospital entrance, leaning on his cane, with Rex walking faithfully by his side. The dog had developed a special bond with him during the investigations, as if understanding the depth of his pain. Sergeant Oliveira placed a hand on his shoulder. "We have already started the procedures to locate her, sir. The photograph is from a theater in Toronto. We have good reason to believe she's still there." "Mr. Alfredo," she said with the innocent wisdom of children, "when I was there, I danced every night thinking of who was looking for me. I bet your daughter also danced thinking of you." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of more police officers, bringing new information about the investigation. Dr. Mendez had started to talk, revealing details of a network that extended far beyond Pleasant Valley. Each confession opened the way for more rescues, more reunions, more old wounds that could finally begin to heal. Clara sat in a nearby chair, feeling the weight of the events and emotions of the day. Beatrice continued guiding the girls in their dance movements, the soft music of a cell phone replacing the old music box. On the face of each child, one could see the beginning of a smile, the promise of healing. A week had passed since the girls' rescue. Pleasant Valley was beginning to resume its normal rhythm, but something had fundamentally changed in the small town. The residents walked more slowly, smiled more easily, stopped to talk to each other more often. It was as if everyone had learned the value of paying attention to the small moments. The Garcia's Cafe had reopened, once again filling the main street with the aroma of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee. Clara was sitting at her usual table by the window, watching Carolina serve the customers with a renewed smile. At the counter, Sophia was doing her homework, occasionally looking up to exchange smiles with the regulars who couldn't resist stopping by to see her. "More chamomile tea, Mrs. Clara?" offered Miguel, his eyes still carrying the marks of sleepless nights, but now shining with a quiet joy. The door chime tinkled, announcing Beatrice's arrival. The young teacher carried a folder full of sheet music and was smiling in a way that Clara hadn't seen in weeks. Clara smiled, remembering how the idea had come up during a conversation at the hospital. Beatrice had realized how dance helped the girls process their experiences, transforming fear into movement, sadness into artistic expression. Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. "Does Alfredo know yet?" "Mrs. Clara," Sophia called, her eyes shining with that unique mixture of innocence and wisdom that only children possess. "Do you think I can write about all this for my writing assignment? The teacher asked us to tell a story about heroes." Sophia thought for a moment, absent-mindedly stroking Rex's ears. "All of us," she finally replied. "Mr. Alfredo, who never gave up looking for the truth. You, who put all the clues together. Rex, who found us. Teacher Beatrice, who taught us that we can dance even when we are afraid. Even Mrs. Margaret, who finally had the courage to tell what she knew." Clara felt her heart expand with the girl's words. "You know, Sophia, I think you've understood something very important. Sometimes the greatest heroes are ordinary people who decide to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." Sophia's eyes lit up as she recognized the sheet music. "The Dance of Hope. Can we use that music for the studio's reopening performance?" The old public library, with its dark wood shelves and tall windows, had been transformed into the makeshift center of an operation that no one could have predicted a few weeks ago. Clara, sitting at her old teacher's desk, was helping to organize dozens of letters and emails that arrived daily. Messages from other cities, from other families, from other stories that were beginning to emerge. Alfredo was in his usual chair near the window, but now he wasn't alone. Rex was dozing at his feet while he was examining old photographs with Mrs. Margaret. The two elderly people had developed an unexpected friendship, united by the mission of helping to identify other children who had experienced the same fate as Marina. Clara adjusted her glasses and examined the image. Her heart leapt as she recognized familiar faces, some of the girls from the photographs found at the warehouse. "Each image is a piece of the puzzle," she murmured, making notes in her notebook. "The date is set," he announced, placing the coffee cups on the table. "Alfredo's reunion with Marina will be next Tuesday. The Toronto Police Department has already confirmed everything." "And she never stopped dancing," Clara gently completed. "She transformed her pain into something beautiful, something that helps other children." "Mr. Alfredo," Sophia called, approaching with an envelope in her hands. "We made something special for you to take when you go to see your daughter." "And there's more," the girl continued, her eyes shining with excitement. "We are preparing a surprise for the Spring Festival. It's going to be a performance about heroes, real heroes like you, Mrs. Clara, and all the people who helped us." "You know, Sophia," Alfredo said, his voice choked with emotion, "when Marina was your age, she always said that dance was a way to tell stories without words. I think now I understand better what she meant." At the end of the afternoon, as the sun set through the library's tall windows, Clara watched the movement on the street. She saw Carolina closing the cafe, Miguel carrying Sophia on his shoulders, Beatriz chatting animatedly with a group of mothers about the new therapy through dance project. "Like a choreography," Clara completed, smiling. "Each movement, each gesture, each pause has its meaning, and in the end, everything comes together in a single dance." Toronto Pearson International Airport was particularly busy that Tuesday. Among the crowd of hurried travelers, a small group stood out for their quiet expectation. Alfredo, wearing his best suit, the same one he kept for special occasions, was flanked by Clara and Sergeant Oliveira. Rex, equipped with his official service dog vest, remained alertly seated next to them. "It's almost time," Clara said softly, checking her watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Marina's flight had landed, and now it was only a matter of moments until she crossed the doors of the landing area. "What if she doesn't recognize me?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. 30 years is a long time." Sergeant Oliveira, who had insisted on accompanying them personally, maintained a professional posture, but his eyes betrayed his emotion. Rex, sensing the growing tension, leaned his muzzle on Alfredo's hand in a comforting gesture. Marina emerged through the automatic doors, her steps still carrying the grace of a ballerina, even after so many years. Her hair, once dark brown like her father's, now had streaks of grey, but her eyes, those eyes that Alfredo saw in his dreams every night, were exactly the same. "Dad!" Marina's voice trembled, and then she was running, her ballerina steps transformed into an urgent run across the airport hall. Clara watched the scene through barely contained tears, noticing how the other travelers stopped to witness the moment. Some took photos, others applauded discreetly, but most just watched in respectful silence, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Rex, who had respectfully stayed away, gently approached the embracing pair. Marina bent down to pet him, laughing through her tears as the dog licked her face. Marina hugged the dog, burying her face in his soft fur. "Thank you," she whispered, and everyone understood that she was thanking not only Rex, but everyone who had helped bring that moment to reality. The tears began to fall again when Marina opened the envelope and saw the photos of the girls dancing. "They're wearing the same ballet slippers, the same model I used to wear." Pleasant Valley's Old Town Theatre had never been so full. It was opening night of the Spring Festival, and the buzz of expectation filled every corner of the century-old space. Clara, sitting in the first row next to Alfredo and Marina, who had decided to stay in town for a few weeks, watched the final preparations on stage. Beatrice moved between the curtains, adjusting costumes and calming last-minute nerves. The new dance studio, now operating in partnership with Marina's academy in Toronto, had become a space of healing and hope for the entire community. Clara smiled, remembering the afternoon when Marina had helped the girls choreograph the main presentation. It had been a cathartic experience for everyone. The children transforming their experiences into movements, Marina finding healing through teaching. The lights began to dim, and an expectant silence took hold of the theatre. On the program, the first presentation was entitled Silent Heroes, a tribute to everyone who had helped unravel the mystery and protect the children. The curtain opened, revealing Sophia in the center of the stage, wearing the pink knitted sweater that Clara had finally finished. One by one, other ballerinas emerged from the wings, each representing a part of the story. A girl with a yellow shawl like Clara's, another with a badge like the sergeant's, a third with a diary like Margaret's. The soft music that began to play was a special composition, a mix of the melody from the old music box with new elements that spoke of hope and renewal. The girls danced with a grace that went beyond technique, telling their story through movements that made the audience hold their breath. At a certain moment, all the ballerinas formed a circle, leaving the center empty. From the right side of the stage, Marina appeared, dancing the same steps she had taught the girls. It was as if the past and the present met in a single dance, weaving a story of loss and reunion. The most touching moment came when all the ballerinas, including Marina, formed a line on the stage. One by one, they walked to the edge of the stage and handed flowers to specific people in the audience. Carolina and Miguel, Sergeant Oliveira, Mrs. Margaret, Clara, and of course, Alfredo. Backstage, after the presentation, Clara found Sophia surrounded by her dance colleagues, all still vibrating with the energy of the performance. Marina joined them, still in her presentation costume. "Dad," she called, turning to Alfredo, who had just entered backstage with the help of Rex. "I've made a decision. I'm going to open a branch of my academy here in Pleasant Valley. These girls, they showed me that sometimes we need to come home to find our true path." A year had passed since that rainy night that changed Pleasant Valley forever. The Garcia's Cafe, now decorated with photographs of Sophia's dance performances, was especially busy that Sunday morning. Clara occupied her usual table by the window, watching the city wake up to another day. The dance academy, now jointly run by Beatrice and Marina, had become a meeting point not only for the children, but for the entire community. The large windows of the studio let the movement of the morning classes show through, where Marina conducted a special class for elderly ladies, an initiative that had arisen after Clara mentioned how much she missed dancing. "More coffee, Mrs. Clara," offered Carolina, her smile now permanently restored. At the counter, Sophia helped her father organize the fresh breads, occasionally performing a small ballet spin between one task and another. The door chime tinkled, announcing the arrival of Alfredo and Rex. The old man was walking more upright now, leaning less on his cane. The dog, officially retired from police service, had been adopted by him and Marina, becoming a constant presence in the dance studio. "Almost," she replied, smiling. "But you know how it is. Stories never really end. They just transform into new beginnings." "They are the new music school teachers," Carolina explained, approaching with the coffee. "They came to get to know the town. Their daughter is going to start ballet classes with Marina next week." "Do you play the violin?" Sophia asked. "That's so cool. Did you know we're preparing a performance that mixes ballet with live music? You could participate." "You know, Clara," Alfredo said, following her gaze, "sometimes I catch myself thinking about how everything connects, how every small act of courage, every moment of kindness, ends up creating something bigger than ourselves. "There's always someone ready to help us get up," Alfredo completed, smiling as he saw his daughter through the window. In a small town called Pleasant Valley, we learned that the true dance of life is not in the steps we take, but in the hands we hold along the way. And as long as there is music in the hearts and hope in the eyes of the children, our dance will continue, infinite and eternal as love itself.